Welcome to Stories of Brisco and Bradshaw. I would be Bradshaw, and that would be your Chickasaw native, your Chickasaw Hall of Famer, Oklahoma's favorite son, Mr. Gerald Brisco. And we have got the greatest topic in the history of the world. We're talking about God bless Texas and Texas wrestling with our favorite historian, the world's greatest historian, and the Hall of Fame historian, Mr. Tony Richards. But before we get started, give a little shout out to our friend Ian Douglas, whose book is winning all kinds of awards. It's about the terrible Turk. Yusuf Ismail, one of my favorite characters of all time, one of the greatest heels of all time. But shout out to Ian Douglas. There's a book. I would highly recommend it. And let's get started with Texas.
And I wish I'd known that we were going to do that. My Ian Douglas book is on across the room. But yeah, it's a fantastic. I'm enjoying it.
Ian Douglas.
Mine too.
Has written some.
And he's got a great one getting ready to come out. Mike Rotundo, is that the one you're talking about, John?
No. He wrote this. The one they got the award on was Yusuf Ismail. It's about the terrible Turk.
Oh yeah, the terrible Turk. Yeah,
he's
got a great one coming out on our good friend Mike Rotundo.
Yeah, he's written some great books on. He has one great book. I can't think of the name of it. It's over there with
the Irish background.
The great black wrestlers of the first half of the century. It's tremendous.
I love that book. That book was fantastic too.
Tremendous book. And
while we're plugging books, let's don't forget our good friend Greg Klein, who came on here a couple of episodes ago and added tremendous added tremendous intelligence to a subject that needs intelligence on Texas.
That's not very nice, Mr. Brisco. Not nice at all.
So anyway, I got to get my shots in on Texas with two S's, by the way. I don't know why you keep spelling it wrong, John.
That's not funny.
This is the decided novelty. This is the history of black wrestling.
Yes. And who was the individual wrestler who wrote about Claiborne?
Yeah, Jack Claiborne.
Jack Claiborne, yeah, terrific book. Ian's a great
writer. And I've been communicating with his granddaughter. She sends me little pictures every once in a while of Claiborne and all that stuff.
Oh, cool!
And it's funny. My wife's uncle's name is Jack Claiborne.
Really?
Yeah, different family, but yeah. I showed Barbara that picture of Jack Claiborne. That's not my uncle. I said, "What's his name, Jack Claiborne?" Well, there's other. She said, "My mom would have flipped because her mom was one of these old Southern redneck ladies that passed away." You know?
I love her already.
Yeah.
Well,
anyway, the Texas wrestler. Where are we at on that, Tony?
Yeah, we're on episode 10, and on episode 9, we were just talking about Greg Klein. He was our guest historian last time, and we talked about the Texas wrestling wars of the 1950s. So we're getting into the decade of the 1950s. Probably, I mean, when you think about it, you think about where professional wrestling was at the turn of the century, just 50 years ago. These guys were
TV's gonna kill wrestling. TV's gonna kill wrestling.
Well, just 50 years ago, these guys were traveling on river boats and by train and by wagon, and they were having these matches in fields and in old theaters and in
through Texas. What do you expect? You know, they didn't have any mode of transportation. They weren't smart enough to put a railroad through there yet, or any desire to.
Won't you turn your headphones off?
You bet somebody want to go for right out for a ball. Now you want me to turn them off.
And you can tell that in 50 years, the whole business has progressed to the point where people are fighting over the money. So you know that the business has gotten to a great multiplier, because television, probably one of the biggest technology changes ever in the history of pro wrestling. We're going through one of those now, which we just talked about last episode too, with streaming. That's also a technology enhancer that is changing the business. So in the 1950s, we had this incredible invention, television, that really took wrestling from the arenas and all the places it had been before and brought it into people's houses. So now these wrestlers are in people's living rooms, which is an amazing, amazing development and a tremendous amplifier to wrestling. You know, I was thinking about it, and Mr. Brisco, I thought, just for you, since we're starting out today in the 1950s, let's put a little bit of Oklahoma history in here.
We don't need to.
Yeah, you need to enlighten this subject here a lot.
February.
You know what I think before you get at it, and John will love it because I'm so damn old. But when I started in 1969, or Jack started in 1965, TV was really still a pretty damn new medium at that time. You know, it's hard to envision television as a new medium when I started. But wow, I mean, it just gotten going. In Oklahoma City had just gotten TV, I think, not too much earlier than when Jack had started wrestling. So.
Well, we went from it being a network thing to it being a local thing. And so when it made that transition in the mid 50s where wrestling promotions started doing their own television production, wow, that was a really big deal. Right. So in 65, you know, when Jack debuted as a pro, that had only been going on for 4 or 5 years. So it really kind of was new. You know, going to WKY in Oklahoma City to do your matches or have your matches recorded, that was a different deal. That was a big thing. Because you weren't going to Dallas or Chicago or Los Angeles. You were going to your local arena and it was being taped. Or the next big innovation, which we talked about in our Jim Barnett series, studio wrestling, where the wrestling came into this small studio at the television station and you were seeing wrestlers compete in matches even more personalized and localized and brought into your own home. That was an amazing augmentation to television. So Oklahoma history, are you ready?
No.
I'm ready.
All right. February 7th.
Clean your ears out for this, John.
Well, actually, this is an Oklahoma thing, but it's really this is really a national wrestling event that happened. February 7th of 1950, Leroy McGurk is being driven by his wrestling student, Bob Clay. And they're going to. They're going.
I'm glad you phrased it like that because that's exactly what Bob Clay was and his brother Leonard.
Yep.
Why is that funny?
Because they were stooges. They were Leroy's main stooges, especially Bob. Because
they were stooges. Did you say students or stooges?
I said student, but
you said. But you thought he said that's good. No, that's good. I think it was better. So wait a minute. This is interesting. So Bob Clay was a stooge.
Yeah, Bob Clay was a stooge for Leroy. Everything that went on in the territory went through Bob Clay. And Bob Clay ran all of those spot show town. Him and his brother Leonard.
He was kind of the Grizzly Smith, like he was to Watts.
The early Grizzly Smith. Yeah.
Bob Clay was that for Leroy. Yeah.
I too watched it as Zion Grizzly I like was Bob Clay.
Yeah. So Bob Clay's driving Leroy McGurk to this restaurant in Little Rock, Arkansas. And they almost have a head-on collision, and they avoid the head-on collision, but Leroy's thrown up against the windshield, and he loses his other eye. So essentially that cost him, and he's the world junior heavyweight champion at the time. So that cost him the title and all that. He has to retire from wrestling and begin to accumulate more points in the territory from Sam Avey, but
I could be mistaken, but I think Bob Clay was with him in the original playground accident where he lost his first eye too.
I think he was at both places.
You think you would stay away from him?
I told you it was a stooge.
Right. So he was there when he lost both eyes.
Both eyes, yeah.
Holy shit!
And he had a lifetime job after that.
He did. And I can't find a photo of him anywhere.
And Bob actually ran for sheriff of Tulsa County. I think it was not Tulsa County, but where Tulsa's at. He got 2 votes.
No!
And him and his brother.
Out of the whole county?
Out of the whole damn county, yeah.
That's the greatest thing I've ever heard. He ran for sheriff. He actually got his name on the ballot?
I got his name on the ballot and got 2 votes. And that was.
And only people voted for him his brother. Nobody else in his family voted for him.
Nobody else in his family voted for him.
So
he was a stooge, John.
Back to wrestling.
That is great. That's the greatest thing I've ever heard.
Back to wrestling. No sheriff career.
Wow.
But
did nobody like him?
He was a real likable guy, but nobody trusted him. There's a difference between liking somebody and trusting somebody.
And you're thinking, I'm not making this guy sheriff. There's no telling what will happen.
Yeah, he's a crook. He's a wrestling promoter. and a bad driver.
apparently.
Everybody lived, but Leroy lost his career. You know?
Yeah, if Leroy would have had a few more eyes, he'd probably had those put out too.
Which was really what I'm not exaggerating. I mean, this was a big deal. I mean, Leroy McGurk was a very accomplished world junior heavyweight champion. He had been
national wrestling champion.
Yeah, he'd been an NCAA champion and was. I mean, I think it kind of changed the course of the whole world junior title. You know, when he couldn't wrestle anymore. Which in these days in 1950, I think I mentioned before, that's the whole reason Dory Funk Sr. went out there, is because of the junior heavyweights being so well used. And
Junior Senior was world junior heavyweight champion too.
Yep, he won it in 1958. In 1947, I think when he went out
did
there,
he beat Leroy for it or?
No, he beat Savoldi.
Savoldi.
Yeah, so there was kind of a three-man angle going on all the time there with Danny Hodge and Angelo Savoldi and Dory Funk Sr.
Savoldi is the one that got stabbed by Danny's dad, John.
Yeah, Danny Hodge's father ran in the ring and stabbed Angelo Savoldi. Yeah, in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
How good did he get him?
I think it was minor.
With the shank.
I think it was minor. I think it was.
It was one of those little pen pocket knives is what he had, and he opened up. Back in those days, everybody carried a little pen pocket knife, with them. I mean,
it wasn't quite an Orange Grove knife, but it was the one Ole used for the blood oath. But
yeah, it was just one of those pen folding knives, and he opened it up and went inside and. What got it was, he was wrestling Danny, but when he started out boxing Danny, that's when Danny's dad got pissed off and got in the ring and so went to slices. He even hit Danny with the knife. I mean, he was that mad. He was slicing anybody that got in the way.
Can you imagine the heat that was in the arena? that your father would run in and stab the other guy?
Yeah.
I mean, that's some serious heat.
But he wasn't smart enough. Danny never smart enough anybody to the business, not even his wife.
No. But Leroy was quite impactful, and that World Junior Heavyweight Championship was just right under the heavyweight title. And those southern states, we talked about it in the Roy Welch series. That's how they got Nashville going. Was they focused on the junior heavyweight title, and they focused on the southern junior heavyweight title. When Dory Funk Sr. went out west, he won the Southwest States Junior Heavyweight Championship. So the junior heavyweights were big deals back in the 40s and the 50s. It started slacking off a little bit as we got into the later 70s and 60s and 70s. But back in these days, the junior heavyweights were the lighter weight, faster working, high spot type wrestlers. So it started
slacking off when Dory Jr. and Jack got the title. Really,
yeah, because they were smaller heavyweights.
Yeah,
more athletic, that kind of thing. It changed that. That's a good point, Jerry. That changed it as well. When he won the title in '69, which we'll get to. But Leroy McGurk has his automobile accident in 1950. And so that also led to the NWA's whole Leader Dogs for the Blind program that they started doing, which was a nationwide nonprofit type deal, all because of Leroy. The television war that we talked about last time with Greg Klein comes to an end around 1954. There's another wrestling war that isn't talked about quite often, but we'll talk about it today, that involved Albuquerque, New Mexico, and El Paso. And few territory disputes in the history of the NWA had as much complicated political stuff going on as this one. Essentially, Mike London, who was a very interesting character, he was actually quite powerful in the West in booking offices. He worked with Barnett and his organization over in Denver, Colorado. He had Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he also.
Mike was still promoting when I was in the business.
I don't think he retired. I don't think he ever retired, Jerry, until the Funks sold.
He had a beautiful young daughter too, my age.
He
enjoyed working there.
I think he retired about 78 or 79 when the Funks sold to Murdoch and Mulligan, but he was there for a long time. He was the guy who essentially what your schedule was in Amarillo was you'd go do local promos on Friday, and then you'd go to the Friday night town, and then you'd go and tape the television studio show on television on Saturday afternoon. And then you'd go to Hereford, Texas that night. And then Sunday, you'd swing by the television station to pick up the tape and take it to Albuquerque. And then the television would run in Albuquerque at 3 o'clock that afternoon, and you would do local interviews live in Albuquerque. And Mike London was holding the microphone, getting over the matches that night in Albuquerque. It was the most interesting setup at the time. But
I could never figure out that territory. You ran Albuquerque, then you had to go up to Colorado Springs, then you had to go all the way back down to San Angelo or something like that, which is like
El Paso.
4 to 500 mile trip, man. It was a brutal trip.
Yeah, just from Amarillo to Albuquerque is 480 miles. So then you had to go to Pueblo or Colorado Springs. Then you had to go to El Paso. And most of the boys also took a little trip over to Juarez while they were down there. And
that's where I got in trouble with Terry Funk.
One of the places.
Yeah.
And then you would go to Odessa, then Lubbock, then back to Amarillo. So in the 1930s, London established himself in Albuquerque. He eventually expanded into El Paso and then to Colorado, creating this booking operation that was a lot larger than you might think of, just as Albuquerque, New Mexico. And it wasn't that he just promoted individual wrestling cards. I mean, he ran the booking office. He supplied wrestlers. He controlled dates. He had relationships with other promoters. And he was the kind of guy that he understood that promoters who control the talent could exert a lot of influence over the smaller cities. So when the National Wrestling Alliance came together in 1948, London became a member. And this is something to think about, too, that in Waterloo, Iowa, this organization, this National Wrestling Alliance starts, talking about growth, this National Wrestling Alliance starts with 6 member booking offices. And by 1952 or 53, it's got over 50 members and booking. That's 800% growth. That's almost like 10 times growth from 1948 to 1952. So just in 5 years, this organization had this amazing amount of influence, which is what got the attention of the Department of Justice, which we'll get to a little bit later on. But London joined the NWA, and he was the Colorado representative for the National Wrestling Alliance because that was kind of the heart of his operation. And he became a member in 1950, and by September 1950, he was formally an NWA member. Now, Dory Denton had been building wrestling in Amarillo after the original Dutch Mantell passed away in 1941. There was no wrestling in West Texas and in Amarillo for 5 years. We talked about Dory Denton from the Denton wrestling family from Utah, came in and established the promotion again in Amarillo in 1946. And so on March 14th of 1946, Dory Denton had the first professional wrestling show in Amarillo in more than 5 years. So from the beginning, he became what was known as Western States Sports. That was the name of the company. And he also controlled about 15 to 18 towns with his booking operation. And he wanted to be an NWA member. And so this causes some friction because he becomes an NWA member in 1951, and his Amarillo booking office was becoming an official NWA territory almost exactly the same time that he was involved in Albuquerque. Now, here's the dispute. According to the records that we have, Dory Denton paid Mike London $3,000 in April 1951 for the booking rights to Albuquerque, New Mexico. That probably should have been the end of it. Denton wrote a check for $3,000 and purchased the rights. London got his $3,000. Albuquerque is now part of the Amarillo booking office. But Mike London disputed the arrangement and continued to claim that he actually owned Albuquerque, New Mexico.
After cashing a check for $3,000,
Yes.
that part of your notes that I got a little confused on is how you got that check, you got the money, but you're still saying it's your territory after you
that should have been
a check that somebody sold to you.
That should have been the end of the business transaction, right?
Exactly. Right.
Mike London sold Albuquerque to Dory Denton. or had Dory Denton really invaded another territory? So it's not as simple as you would think, but territory rights were often based on a combination of contracts, personal agreements, long-standing relationships. What are you really buying? You're buying the rights to something. Well, how did the original person get the rights to sell them to you? They just kind of claimed them, right? So when Denton applied for NWA membership in 1951, after his involvement in Albuquerque had become controversial, London was already a member too, so he's protesting that Denton can't become a member. And Muchnick is the president of the NWA and gets the evidence, and he's convinced that Dory Denton had purchased the Albuquerque town legitimately, but he sent it to committee, right? Muchnick hardly ever did the heavy-handed decisions on his own, and they sent a ballot around at the conference asking members whether they favored Dory Denton to be processed and admitted to the NWA, or if they thought it should be postponed until they met again the following year. Well, it sort of demonstrates how seriously the NWA regarded these territory disputes, because the organization was functioning as a governing body among competing businessmen. It had no real simple court system of settling every disagreement. It goes to committee. Now, another thing that twists and turns this a little bit is Pinky George, who we talked about, was actually involved in one of the Texas wrestling wars last time with Greg Klein.
And a founder of the NWA.
Founder of the NWA. Well, here's what I've decided about Pinky George after studying him very intensely over the last several years. He was the kind of guy that wanted to be known as the founder of the NWA, but he never really wanted to do anything. He just kind of wanted to be known as, and he wanted to have power by being the founder, but he really didn't want to be president. So he always gets involved in these things where he's throwing his weight around when he probably shouldn't be. So Pinky George disagrees with Sam Muchnick that Dory Denton legitimately paid for the town. And Pinky George argued that Denton had invaded this territory that belonged to Mike London, and he shouldn't be admitted to the NWA because he was invading another guy's space. So Pinky George regarded the situation a lot more serious than just a little business misunderstanding. Now, we should also mention that Pinky George himself had been invaded on by another NWA member as well, and he slow and surely lost Iowa. That's how he ended up down in Texas. So he kind of got a chip on his shoulder about people violating and invading other people's wrestling territories. But he thought that Dory Denton had violated their territory principles, and he wanted both promoters to come in and have a meeting before the grievance committee and stand up both guys in front of them and this, that, and the other. Now, the reason Pinky George's position is important is because it demonstrates there was no unanimous opinion inside the National Wrestling Alliance. It just sort of ebbed and flowed among the membership. Muchnick believed the evidence supported Denton. He had a canceled check for $3,000 that Mike London had cashed, and that was the end of it. Pinky George thought Mike London had a legitimate gripe that he had been invaded on by another member. So they were caught between two competing interpretations of its own territory rules. And Mike London decides he's going to fight it. He wasn't going to wait for a ruling from the NWA, so he reopened his booking office in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which was a direct challenge to Denton's Amarillo booking office, and London requested a date for Lou Thez to come in and defend the NWA World Heavyweight Championship and his card in Albuquerque that was supposed to be bought by Denton. So this is a potentially devastating situation. In the territory system, the world champion was one of the most valuable pieces of political currency available to an NWA promoter. The fact that you could get the NWA World Heavyweight Champion to come and headline your card meant money. It meant fans. It meant more tickets being sold. And if London could bring Lou Thez into Albuquerque while Denton was still trying to establish his brand new operation in Amarillo, it would effectively tell everyone and fans that Mike London still controlled Albuquerque. Now, the weird thing about this is it all gets settled, and it all gets settled in Dory Denton's favor, and Albuquerque does become part of the Amarillo booking office eventually, but the local promoter is still Mike London. He's still the guy that promoted Albuquerque, like Jerry said. He was still there when Jerry was there in the mid 70s. So they have this dispute, and it eventually moved to the NWA boardroom into the Albuquerque marketplace. And Dory Denton establishes operation, and he has his wrestling cards at the 2030 Club at the Albuquerque Armory. And he has a guy that used to be a wrestler in the territory named Gorilla Poggy. And Gorilla Poggy is his local promoter there. And Denton supplied his Albuquerque shows with wrestlers from the Amarillo office. So one of the people that would be appearing there from Dory Denton would be Dory Funk Sr., Dick Murdoch's father, Frankie Hill Murdoch, Gory Guerrero, Tony Morelli. Dory Denton could also get Danny McShane, who was the world junior heavyweight champion. We talked about that a little bit earlier. London operated from what was called the Ice Arena, and they had competing shows in Albuquerque. Dutton's 2030 Club were held on Friday nights, and Mike London's shows were at the Ice Arena on Thursdays and later Monday nights. So Albuquerque suddenly had competing wrestling promotions. For the promoters, it meant every date was a contest, and every wrestler mattered, every newspaper advertisement mattered, every attendance figure mattered, and every important championship appearance could determine which promoter was controlling the market. So the most dramatic example, and Greg Klein and I briefly mentioned this last time in episode 9, that in July 1952, there was a card held called the Parade of Champions. And Dory Denton's operation had a major Friday night card scheduled at the Armory. Danny McShane, NWA World Junior Heavyweight Champion, against the Masked Marvel, which we talked about the Masked Marvel in a couple of episodes back. He's back here again in 1952. And London scheduled a major Parade of Champions show at the Ice Arena on Thursday, July 10th. The night right before Dory Denton's show. How long has this been going on, John? Long time, right? As long as wrestling's been happening, you've got promoters, updating them the night before or whatever. So Mike London denied. He said, "I'm not deliberately attempting to undermine Dory Denton's show. Thursday was the only day I could bring wrestlers into Albuquerque. I didn't have any choice about this. But the timing was obvious enough that Dory Denton's representatives in town, they were upset and they objected." So Paul Ripberger, who was of the 2030 Club, appeared before the Albuquerque City Council on July 8th, 1952, asking the city to get involved with this wrestling war and conflict. Guess what was done? Nothing. The city did not.
Nothing.
The city didn't attempt to give one wrestling promoter exclusive access to the market, which was an important victory for London because he's the guy in the wrong who got the $3,000 to begin with, right? So you sold the booking rights and you sold the town to the guy, but you're still going to run it, even though you got a $3,000 check from him, and you're saying it's your right to run a show there, even though you sold it to him. So London's July 10th show shows how serious the wrestling war and the competition had become. It was a double main event. Danny Luce defeated Al Williams for the Rocky Mountain Heavyweight Championship. Ricky Romero would eventually become the perennial Rocky Mountain Heavyweight Champion in the Amarillo territory for like 15 years. Mildred Burke defended her women's championship against Theresa Theus, who eventually would marry Ray Stevens. That was Ray Stevens' wife. While Mildred Burke would actually lose the first fall before keeping her women's championship, London reportedly had an attendance around 5,000 fans. The newspapers do not confirm such a figure, so the number could be treated as London's bragging or expectation or whatever. But there is one important piece of evidence from the competing show. The Albuquerque Journal reported that the 2030 Club's Friday night Dory Denton show was about 300 below its normal crowd of about 1,100. So it strongly suggests that London's counter-programming did have an effect on Dory's show, and both people were apparently making money, but the contest was beginning to tilt London's way, even though he was supposedly in the wrong. So the crucial factor was not just the quality of the wrestlers. London had been promoting Albuquerque for years. He knew the market. He had been there. He had relationships with local officials. He had fans that he was in relationship with. It's one of those. It's almost like after the Jarrett and Nick Gulas split up, right? Jerry Jarrett tried to come in and promote Chattanooga, and he couldn't get anything going in Chattanooga because Nick Gulas had been there for years, and he knew the fans, and he had a relationship with them. In Memphis, Nick Gulas couldn't get anything going in Memphis because Jerry Jarrett had been there underneath Roy Welch, and he had a relationship with people in Memphis and had a relationship with the fans there. So it does matter who the local promoter is as far as, when you go in to try to compete with somebody. London had an established building at the Ice Arena, and he knew how to construct a wrestling card that could compete directly with Dory Denton. Denton had something valuable too. He had access to the Amarillo booking talent, and he had a lot of wrestlers, and we named them Dory Funk Sr. and Gory Guerrero and such. But the Amarillo office was trying to establish itself in a city that London had already been considering his home territory. So they were having a big-time territory war here. Denton could bring the stars into Albuquerque, but London could make Albuquerque his battlefield because he knew it and had relationships, and he had the advantage. Now, guess what happens in this wrestling war? A building burns down. So,
Go figure.
in 1953, an event outside of the control of either promoter changed the situation. The Ice Arena, where London had made his headquarters and his wrestling show, burned down, which was a devastating blow to London's Albuquerque operation because that building had been the physical center of his competing promotion. So by January 1954, Mike London had to move over to the Armory for his wrestling shows, and that building had previously been associated with Denton's 2030 Club, where he was running his show. So it's kind of interesting the way the whole thing, the building that represented Denton's opposition ultimately became the home of London's operation after the Ice Arena burned down. And most importantly, Denton, the rival operation, was no longer active. The Albuquerque War was essentially over. Mike London survived, and it's a victory for Mike London, although Denton's original $3,000 purchase and the NWA's recognition of the Amarillo office created a complicated paper trail. Now, the historical record...
Tony, let me jump in here now.
Yeah.
During this battle, that didn't London try to get Lou to come in, and they were denied?
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, he tried to book the NWA champion because he is an NWA member, but he's an NWA member in Colorado. Okay. So he's trying he's trying to use his membership in Colorado to book the champion in New Mexico.
Yeah.
So Denton controlled Albuquerque from around 1951 to 1955, and it actually did go in the purchase when Doc Sarpolis buys Amarillo in 1955, while London's NWA Albuquerque operation was still active in several periods, and they eventually work it out. London ends up working with the Amarillo office, but by the 1950s, the NWA had recognized London as their principal Albuquerque operator. And that's why the later history of Albuquerque becomes so important. London remained associated with the city, like I said, up until almost 1980. He would eventually build Albuquerque into one of the most durable wrestling markets in the Southwest. And it drew. I mean, it drew really, really well. It was one of the best drawing towns that the Amarillo office had later on. And so
Mike ran a real tight show there too. He was one of the really old school promoters.
He was a good businessman, and he owned a bar across the street there in Albuquerque. And he, like I said, he was the guy that went to the television station every Sunday, and he did the local.
He was a politician type guy. I mean, he was always around shaking hands, and if he had a young guy, like Jack and I, he always took us around to the city officials and introduced us. And he was a real promoter at that time.
And he was I don't know if you can find a picture of Mike London, John, but he was a little wiry kind of guy. Like he had a fairly decent wrestling career before he became a promoter, but he would look scrappy, and he
was an amateur wrestler too, from what I remember.
Yeah, and he was kind of a little bit of a strange dude too, like all wrestling promoters. But
yeah, he was.
Now, the other town that's connected to this, the reason we're talking about all this, and where the Texas connection comes in, is the El Paso connection. So the El Paso Wrestling Association had been in business since 1919, and we talked about this in one of our episodes previously. We talked about El Paso. John McIntosh. John McIntosh controlled the city, and then he passed it off to Harry Kaufman, and Harry Kaufman worked with McIntosh. London eventually acquired an interest in the El Paso operation and used El Paso as another base for his Southwest booking activities. So he had Denver, he had
that Mike London?
Yeah.
Let me see.
That looks like Abe Jacobs, really.
Yeah, it kind of does look like.
Maybe it's not.
Mike
It looks like Abe Jacobs.
I knew Mike when he had silver hair, kind of like you're talking.
But he kind of looks like that picture of Abe, but I don't think that's
I mean, he was built like that. He was built like that.
Yeah, so we've talked about El Paso, and he had it connected with his Denver operation, his Albuquerque operation. So he controlled a lot of territory. No.
Nope. I got a bunch of Mike Londons on here.
Maybe we want to put in Mike London Albuquerque promoter or something.
I did.
Okay.
Don't get hot, John. Holy
How about half hot?
Don't get hot at the researcher. So this gives him this whole geography in the West, Albuquerque to the north, El Paso to the south, Denver, Colorado to the north, Amarillo to the east. London was positioned to operate a huge portion of the southwest part of the United States.
A question there is Denver to the north there. That area never ran Denver, though, as part of the territory, though, did it? I mean, they ran Colorado Springs and Pueblo,
right?
But I don't think we ever went into Denver.
Yeah, because Denver got it was part of the Amarillo office, but it got sold to Vern Gagne.
Okay, so Funk and Scarpolis team sold it
to Gagne, and Gagne made it part of the AWA. So they ran.
So that's the reason they could still go into Pueblo and Colorado Springs, but not Denver.
Yeah, they went up to Pueblo, Colorado Springs, but they gave Denver over to Vern. So Vern ended up running Denver once a month as part of his AWA after 1960. So here's another interesting cat that comes into the picture. So when the NWA structure recognized El Paso in 1950, the NWA promoter was Sam Miniker. So the historical listings identify El Paso as an NWA office from August 1950 to September 1955, and being operated by Slick Sam Miniker.
Who's a good friend of Jim Barnett's, too, by the way.
Yep. And he was Barnett's announcer for years up in the Indianapolis office.
And Australia.
So this is an important correction to the little simple version of the story, which London is described as the El Paso promoter. London was certainly deeply involved in El Paso, but by the beginning of the 1950s, the formal NWA structure placed Sam Miniker as the principal promotional position, with Mike London being involved. Miniker became an NWA member in November 1951. There's Slammin' Sammy.
Yeah.
Slammin' Sammy Miniker. I think that is on the Bruisers television there in Indiana. So London was no doubt deeply involved in El Paso, but by the beginning of the 50s, Miniker was the one recognized, and he became a member in November 1951. So the 1952, 53, 54 NWA membership records list Sam Miniker as the El Paso representative. So that means that the London-Denton conflict over Albuquerque occurred at a moment when London's position in El Paso was changing. So Denton's interest in Albuquerque brought him into conflict with London because of the geography of the two towns. El Paso and Amarillo were natural partners. Amarillo could supply West Texas from their office. El Paso was an enormous border city market. Albuquerque provided a natural western extension. The promoter who controlled all three could create a powerful southwest circuit. That's why Albuquerque mattered so much to the Amarillo office. It wasn't just a city worth fighting over. It was the missing link between Amarillo, West Texas, and New Mexico Rocky Mountain markets that they eventually wanted to get into in Colorado. London understood that, Denton understood that, and the NWA understood that. But who controlled it? This is where the dispute becomes really historically important. London and Denton's war was essentially a struggle between two different models of territory power. Mike London had built out from Albuquerque, and his strength came from a network extending into El Paso and Colorado. And Dory Denton had built outward from Amarillo, and his strength came from West Texas and the Panhandle. So both were trying to create regional booking empires. Albuquerque was right between the two. That's why the city was strategically important, and the fight was more about that than just a single arena. It was about the future shape of what the Southwest wrestling map was going to look like. And the dispute exposed a fundamental contradiction inside the NWA. The NWA existed to protect its members from outside competition. But what happened when two members claimed the same city?
Yeah.
So the organization had to determine which promoter actually owned the legitimate rights to the town. And that was a lot more difficult than simply enforcing.
That was just strictly political there.
Yeah. London and Denton's dispute demonstrates that the NWA territories were not always neat geographical boundaries. They were commercial relationships. They were built on contracts, historical claims, personal agreements, local promoters, and the most important thing, money. So the $3,000 payment was pretty crucial. If Denton really did buy Albuquerque for $3,000, then he had a powerful claim to it. But if London had retained other rights, or if the agreement was conditional, London could argue that Dory Denton had exceeded what he really purchased. The surviving evidence suggests that even the NWA leadership struggled to establish exactly what happened. And it cost the alliance, too, because the Albuquerque dispute demonstrated the NWA could become concerned about the wars going on within its own membership. The greatest asset the NWA had was cooperation between all of these guys. Promoters shared wrestlers. They booked the world champion. They recognized regional championships. They maintained territories and boundaries. But what happens when a war breaks out within those boundaries? And we would have that. You know, we've covered several of those, you know, in the past. We talked about Atlanta, and we've talked about, you know, Jarrett and Goulas, and we talked about, you know, these different wars that can break out after this. This might have been the first one the NWA really had to work on settling. So instead of cooperating, Mike London and Dory Denton were competing for the same fans. And instead of sharing dates, they were counter-programming against each other and running against each other inside the own NWA membership. So instead of using NWA championships to strengthen the business collectivity, championship appearance could become weapons in territory politics. Lou Thez is the clearest example. London wanted Thez. Mushnick said no, because if he allowed London to bring the world champion into Albuquerque, he could have altered the balance of the war. It was an extraordinary exercise of political authority. Then in 1955, something changed. Dory Denton sold Amarillo's booking office to Carl Doc Sarpolis, who we've talked about a lot in this series, because he's probably the most influential person.
He's everywhere. Sarpolis is everywhere.
He's the most, and in my Dory Funk Jr. Article that I wrote, that feature, I tried to emphasize how politically powerful Sarpolis was in positioning Dory.
He seemed to me like he was more powerful than Sam at the time.
Yeah, and Sam really respected him too. They were very good friends. Sam went to Amarillo a lot when Doc owned the territory. So the NWA records show Sarpolis bought the territory from Dory Denton in September 1955, and about the same time Sam Menaker's El Paso NWA affiliation ended. Now this is
that didn't last long there, did it?
No, so this is a major reorganization of the whole Southwest. The old Denton, McIntosh, Menaker era was ending. The Doc Sarpolis, Bartlett, Dory Funk Sr. era was starting. And London,
Bartlett's a name I'm sure you'll get into that's just completely forgotten.
Judge Bartlett, yeah, he's an interesting character. He was actually he was a U.S. District Court judge in Waco, and he was the wrestling promoter in Waco. Can you imagine? And guess what? He was partners in Waco with a local attorney there in Waco. Can you imagine the politics that stirred up? So the judge and the lawyer are wrestling partners. So the interesting
Waco was
thing,
home with David Koresh too, so there's a little bit of history there.
There you go. So the interesting thing is the
Who is
man
from Oklahoma, I think.
At least.
that's
I think he's from
as,
Ada, Oklahoma, or Stillwater.
Yeah.
as Doc Holliday would say, that's the rumor. The irony is that the guy who lost the Albuquerque battle ultimately becomes one of the most powerful figures in the territory that would control Albuquerque. So Dutton's Western State Sports developed a relationship with Mike London's Albuquerque operation. So what we have of the records indicate that the Amarillo office was affiliated with Albuquerque again around 1958. And a lot of that probably has to do with Sarpolis's political maneuvering and his ability to build relationships. So he builds a relationship with London, and London becomes the local promoter in Albuquerque and brings it back into the Amarillo office. So the two systems that once fought over the city eventually become partners. So it's a great illustration of the way.
Don't you guys think? I mean, it's strange as hell. I mean, here in Texas at Amarillo, and way out 300 miles or 400, whatever it is.
480.
480 miles since Albuquerque, New Mexico, by itself. And that's the only thing out there. Was it really worth fighting for? I don't know.
Well, not only,
strange, but it's a major player in that West Texas scene.
And not only that, but in 1958, which we'll get to at some point, 1958, they go even further west in the Amarillo office. So, yeah, 480 miles to Albuquerque, and you're going to extend it another several hundred miles beyond that. So the London and Denton War has all these, it impacts the future of Southwest wrestling, right? Mike London emerged with Albuquerque as his long-term town. He would eventually build a territory that included Albuquerque, Colorado, and some other markets. Dory Denton's operation passed to Doc Sarpolis, and that partnership transformed the Amarillo territory in one of the greatest wrestling territories of the post-war era. The eventual Western States sports territory would have Amarillo, El Paso, Lubbock, Abilene, Odessa, San Angelo, Albuquerque. When Doc Sarpolis buys it, he buys it for $75,000, and he gets 18 towns with it. So the very market over which Denton and London had fought became part of the larger Southwest network that would be based in Amarillo. Now, why does this matter to Texas wrestling history? Well, Amarillo's wrestling territory was never confined neatly to the Texas Panhandle. It also controlled parts of Colorado. It also controlled parts of Idaho. It controlled parts of New Mexico. It would also, for a brief time, for almost a year, would control Tucson, Arizona. So they went even further west and bought the Tucson booking office. And they actually tried to run it too. So they had guys driving from Amarillo.
Poor guys in those days, there were no gas stations in between. Even when I was there, I mean, you had to pick your gas station early in the day because you knew you had that gigantic run and hope you made it into the next town and had the gas station.
And they tried to run Madison Square Garden, which was the arena in Phoenix. They tried to run it on a Monday night, which was the regular night for wrestling in Phoenix.
Now, who owned it at that time?
So they bought Sarpolis and Bartlett bought Tucson in 1957, and they owned it for about 8 months, and they sold it back to Rod Fenton again later on the summer of '58 because it was just too far. It was a lot like the reason that Roy Welch gave up Florida. You know, it was just too far. And there wasn't the highways. I mean, the 2-lane highways that they dealt with back then.
I can only imagine of the highways back in those days.
It sucks with the interstate going out that way.
Yeah.
And the lack of, like you said, the gas stations and you know, trying to. And I've got the booking sheets and all from that time period where Iron Mike DiBiase is booked in. Let's see what it would have been on Saturday. He would have been booked in like Colorado Springs or Pueblo, and then Monday night he's got to be in Tucson, Arizona, and then Tucson, Arizona he leaves there to go to Odessa, Texas, and then from Odessa then the loop kind of goes back to Lubbock and Amarillo, but that is a long circle to go to Phoenix. And of course, the way the wrestling business works, you can't have different guys there every week. You know, you're running weekly, you got to tell a story. So you got one guy who or maybe 6 guys who've got to make that loop for 6 to 8 weeks to keep the story going. So that's a lot of miles, and it just didn't work. I mean, they had to give it back or sell it back to Rod Fenton. It was a bold move because Sarpolis is sitting there, and we've kind of covered his relationship with Houston and Dallas. You know, he had a great relationship. He'd booked both. He was part owner in the Texas Wrestling Agency and all. He can't go that way. He can't go east. He can't encroach and invade on his former partners, Ed McLemore and Morris Siegel. So what else can you do?
West was the only way to go. He couldn't go south because it's Mexico. So.
That's right. And so west was Tucson, so they decided to do that. But after about 8 months, they said, "We'll go." Rod, would you buy this back from us?
Sounds like the modern day Bill Watts, Louisiana territory.
Yeah. That West Texas, that was quite a loop for sure. So the wrestling wars of the early 50s, you know, had been fought over the control of Texas cities, Dallas, Houston. The talent wanted to be compensated for the syndicated television. All of that kind of ground down to a halt. And actually in 1953, Dory Funk Sr. actually left Texas. He had resigned his position at the Texas Boys Ranch, the Cal Farley Boys Ranch, and he had decided to go back to Indiana and resume his wrestling career in the Midwest. And when Sarpolis bought Amarillo in 1955, one of the first things he did was to convince Dory Funk Sr. to come back to Texas. And
was that through a partnership?
Yeah, he began to accumulate points in the office because, you know, you couldn't hold the dual license. You couldn't get a promoter's license and a wrestling license. And he was the centerpiece babyface. So Sarpolis convinced him to come back. He told him, "I'll make you the centerpiece babyface. We're going to let everything revolve around you." So Funk Sr. moved everybody back to Texas, and he stayed there then until he passed in 1973. And in 1958, he won the World Junior Heavyweight Championship, like we talked about earlier. And and Sarpolis was positioning Senior to actually win the title from Thez, the World Heavyweight Championship. And when that didn't happen, and the alliance decided to go with Buddy Rogers, who Sarpolis had also made a star in Texas, Sarpolis had developed a distaste for Buddy Rogers and didn't want him to be the world champion. He wanted Funk Sr. to be a world champion. Well, when they went with Rogers, it made Sarpolis mad, and he was actually the president of the NWA at the time. So they invented their own world title in Amarillo, and so it was.
This is where it gets confusing, but very interesting to me.
It's the only time in history where the NWA president did not recognize the NWA world champion. It recognized their own champion.
Yeah, Gene
and
Kiniski.
They made Gene Kiniski their champion.
How did Gene get into the picture? Because he was a Canadian football.
Yeah, he was a Canadian football player and a close friend of Senior's. He had worked the West Texas territory starting in the late 50s and had developed a relationship with Doc Sarpolis and the Funks.
Did they know each other through college or anything like that?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Only when Gene broke into the business and started working. I think they were connected through Wilbur Snyder, who had played on a pro football team with Kiniski. But they made Gene Kiniski their world champion, and essentially then they had Funk Jr. beat Kiniski for the local Amarillo World Heavyweight Championship, which upset the NWA membership to no end. And eventually, you know, Thez would come in after they settled the dispute. Thez would come in and beat Junior, and that was the end of that local title. But what's interesting is eventually the title line would go through those same two guys.
Through those same guys, that's where it gets interesting to me.
Kiniski would beat Thez, and then Funk Jr. would beat Kiniski by 1969 to win the title. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but it's all interesting and connected. So that's the Texas wrestling war that was fought in New Mexico and also in El Paso, and the story of Amarillo really becoming a power in the National Wrestling Alliance when Doc Sarpolis came in and bought it first. And there's a whole drama around the $75,000 that Doc paid for Amarillo as well. When Doc left the wrestling business, He left the wrestling business when the Texas Wrestling War broke out because he didn't like Morris Siegel blackballing guys in the Texas Wrestling Agency. And he actually thought the talent should get compensated for appearing on the television.
He
And
did?
so,
Wow.
yeah, so he left the business kind of disgusted. He bought a hotel just outside Dallas, and he operated that hotel for about a year. But the other thing he did was he went out to Los Angeles and he helped Cal Eaton out there and Johnny Doyle. And so there's a lot of speculation that the $75,000 came from Cal Eaton so that Doc could buy Amarillo. I think the $75,000 came from the Judge Bartlett, who was his partner. And that's why
It would
Bartlett
seem like that was where the money train was. Right there.
I mean, Bartlett was very well off. You know, he had the money and the resources in order to do it, and that's why he was involved in the Amarillo office, because he was the money guy, I think. Because he wasn't really active in the office, or he didn't have anything other than the partnership. He was a promoter in Waco, and he was an NWA member as well, along with the lawyer in Waco that he was a partner of. But I think he probably supplied that initial cash. And that's another thing that people get convoluted, is that Dory Funk Sr. was not part of that original transaction. He was not part of the group that bought Amarillo. He came in as an
He
owner.
was brought in because he was a special talent and he could draw money.
Right. And they could build the territory around him as the baby face. They could bring in the monster heels and he could, whack them and drive them out of the territory, the wrestling storyline. And they, and Sarpolis thought he was marketable, and they thought he could push him, and he pushed him to the world junior title, and he thought he could eventually be the world champion. And that was one of the reasons why it was so important and so fulfilling for Funk Sr. when Junior won the title, is because he always kind of felt like it escaped
and
him.
was recognized as champion nationwide, worldwide.
Right, because he always felt like it escaped him. It was the thing that got away that he never got, and he would have been so thrilled to know that both of his sons would win the world title, but unfortunately he didn't live that long.
And Eddie would kind of tell the same story about the Funk, about the senior. That's the reason he pushed so hard for the guys to become world champion, because he always felt, and according to Eddie, Senior always felt like he was overlooked because he was the junior heavyweight champion of the world and all that stuff, and he was overlooked for the big world title, heavyweight world title.
It was very close to happening, and it was a real departure.
What was a political thing that they just didn't have a vote for him?
Some of it was Sam's influence, because you got to remember that Sam could not get a foothold in St. Louis, and Tom Pax was the dominant promoter, and
Lou was working for Sam at the
and Lou was working.
Tom Pax,
Lou,
right?
Lou was working for Tom Pax, right? It's the National Wrestling Association, and Pax was drawing 12,000, 13,000 every single show at the Keel. Mushnick was running another arena, couldn't draw 2,000 people. And then he went to Waterloo. He was in part of the NWA meeting in Waterloo, one of the founding members, and part of the reason was because they wanted to establish a world champion.
Was Tom Pax out there too, or was it just the Sound?
No, Pax was not part of it, because he controlled the National Wrestling Association. And part of the reason the 6 promoters went to Waterloo to form the National Wrestling Alliance was because of their frustration of not being able to book the world champion. Pinky George couldn't get the world champion in Des Moines. Orville Brown couldn't get the world champion in Missouri. The guys that were Al Haft couldn't get him regularly in, because they were regarded as secondary cities.
Why Waterloo? Gerald asked me that question up in Waterloo. Why Waterloo? Was it just close? The geography type deal? It was close.
It was Waterloo because of Pinky George.
Okay, well, yeah, but he was Des Moines. They were Des Moines promoter, right?
Yeah, but they decided to meet in Waterloo. I don't know exactly why, but it was because Pinky George lived in Iowa, and it was his idea. He's the one that wrote the letter to to Fred Kohler and to Al Haft, and he wrote these guys and said, "Let's sit down and talk about if we can make an arrangement where."
And he lost his territory, and that's the reason he moved to Texas. Who did he lose it to? Vern.
He would have lost it to it would have been Gus Karras
Gus Harris.
out of St. Joe, because he was the booking office in St. Joe that put all the great, guys in the business like Larry Hamilton and Jody Hamilton and Harley Race, all those guys came out of.
That's the reason Pickey ended up in Texas then, right?
Yeah, because Gus Karras kept going north from Missouri, and again, it was another member encroaching on another territory, left unchecked. And
that's what I find fascinating too about what we were discussing too. The NWA, they were settled political disputes, but boundaries. I mean, how do you determine a boundary? Who owned what? I mean, that had to be their toughest job. Okay, well, then TV encroachment. I mean, they seem to have a better handle on their territorial system because the TV was only licensed to go so far during that.
Well, you remember this, Jerry? But it used to be that when guys would talk about television coming in from somewhere, it would be, "Don't you put a tape in my territory."
Yeah,
that's what they would say.
Yeah.
They would say, "Don't you bring a tape into my territory," and essentially they were talking about, "Don't you put a television show of your wrestling in my geography," because that was what really formalized those territory lines, was the television signals.
Was the television market.
That's why I've got this map behind me here of all the television markets in the United States, because if you look at the television markets, you can see the territories.
Yeah.
Because those television markets determined where the territories were.
Right.
And guys would put their television tape in the television stations in those markets, and that determined their wrestling territory.
In Texas, the damn place is so flat and so windy down there. It seemed like the borderlines in Texas would be blown out before.
Well, there's a lot of space in between stuff, so
it's a beautiful border down there.
Empty space too, by the way.
It's not like crowded over here in this part of the United States, where it's 50.
Why would it be, Tony?
Why was
jackrabbits and rattlesnakes out there?
Good looking jackrabbits and rattlesnakes too, by the way.
Yeah.
Why was I never understood why Amarillo was so important. I mean, there's nothing.
Yeah, nothing.
There's nothing out there, and you got to go to Albuquerque and Las Cruces is forever. To go to Odessa even is forever. Go to El Paso is forever. Why was New York and Chicago not the main groups that were running things?
Because it was just too small for them. I mean, it's the business philosophy. Amarillo sort of gravitated the Southern business philosophy of wrestling, which was you have an arena that is somewhere between 3,000 and 6,000 capacity, and you run it every week. Northeast, they had the philosophy of go to the 20,000 seat arena or the 15,000 seat arena and run it once a month. Well, they thought that business model was more attractive than the one in the South, which was pretty much weekly wrestling in the smaller arena. Which one is better? I don't know. I mean, I don't think you can compare them almost. I mean, is it better to draw 25,000 people once a month or to drive 5,000 people 5 times a month? It's hard. I think it's harder to do it 5 times a month, but and that's why
it's definitely harder.
The things in the South were different. It's why, that's how Roy Welch and those guys pretty much invented that philosophy of angles and storylines and weekly arena shows, and all of that was different than it was.
If you're running once a month, you don't really have to worry about a continuing storyline. I mean, you can just put a fresh card of hot people off your TV in there and perhaps draw a crowd without.
Well, look at Bruno in the 70s. Like in one year, he would wrestle Superstar Graham, Stan Hansen, Bruiser Brody, Ivan Koloff, Ernie Ladd, and those would be the monthly shows. Whereas in the South, you'd have the same kind of program running every week with storylines that would revolve around up and down the card.
What year did Dory Sr. die?
73.
Did you ever meet him, Mr. Brisco?
Oh yeah, I worked with him.
He worked with
He
him in
worked
the
with
ring.
Senior.
I believe that card and on Tony's deal is that me and Jack against Dory Senior
Yeah.
and
In
Dory
Greensboro.
and Greensboro. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we were talking the other day for what 7 years there was a Brisco and a Funk on the main event of that Greensboro card for 7 straight years.
Yeah, the Thanksgiving
Really?
show.
The biggest show of the year.
The biggest show of the year was Thanksgiving in the Carolinas for Jim Crockett Promotions, and from 1970 to 1976, there was a Funk or a Brisco on the main event, and a lot of times both.
Who went over?
That one I can't remember. I went to the TV with Dory one time. Dory had a complete. He gave me the packet. I got it around there somewhere. It's that damn thick of every Funk Brisco match in history of every combination, and who won and the time limit and all. It was pretty cool. He gave it to me in a really nice book.
How many matches were there? Any idea?
I think.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Wow.
Well, there were at least 75 Dory Funk Jr. Jack Brisco title matches.
Our
Broadways. Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that Mr. Brisco and I were talking about on my show where we were doing the Dory Funk Jr. tribute is the Funk Brisco feud never ended. Like there was never a conclusion. It just kept going. And, you know, one of the cool things it occurred to me later, Jerry, that we didn't talk about that we could talk about here is that how you and Jack were the baby faces in the feud a lot of places except for West Texas. But then as you guys developed into the 80s, you finally became a heel team in the Carolinas.
Yeah, exactly. There was,
that's because Steamboat was better looking.
Yeah, and better, yeah. Better arm drag, as I'm being told when I said Jack had the best arm drag, everybody should just be, no, Steamboat did. I tell Steamboat didn't even know what an arm drag was when Jack was telling him.
Oh, I mean, it's the same people that talk about Dory Funk Jr. working slow. Yeah. I mean, you watch him take a Jack Brisco arm drag.
Yeah. you watch some of their in between spots there. There's nothing slow about Dory.
Oh Jr. My gosh. Well, there was a video.
Perfect bump master too. I mean, you know, that's what made that arm drag so spectacular because of Dory's bump taking ability and his ability to get up there.
That match in '75 in Japan where Jack's the champion and Dory's the challenger, they're both flying for each other. I mean,
they do like a 3-minute spot there that's just unbelievable. Even today, people, I mean, they couldn't do what they were doing there.
Whose idea was it, Jerry, for y'all to turn heel?
Where, in the Carolinas?
In the Carolinas, yeah.
Actually, it was Ricky Steamboat's. We were coming back there, just got out of the program with Sarge.
He wanted to sell more merch than you.
Yeah.
So he wanted you to be a heel.
Wanted us to be the heel, and so they just got out of that fantastic run with Sarge and Kernoodle, and they had nobody new to work with. They were going to have to start recycling opponents for them. And we were coming back from Raleigh. I'll never forget it. And Ricky said, "Why don't you guys turn heel?" And Jack said, "I'd love to," but it took 2 months to convince Jimmy Crockett Jr. to let us do it because they were running 3 towns a night, and they needed all the babyface teams because that was babyface territory. They needed all the top babyface teams they could. So Ricky and Jay were handling one town, and Jack and I were handling another town, and then another group was handling the third town. And Jimmy did not want to give up one of his main babyface tags. So that territory was built around tag teams. But it took us about 2 months, and finally Jack kind of threatened, "I'm going to go home because I got nothing else to do here."
You know, talking just a little bit ahead here that we'll get into, but one of the things, since we're so close to Junior's passing, one of the interesting things was how much the NWA title changed when Dory Jr. won it. And one of the ways it changed was there had never been any programs or angles around anybody other than the champion. But when Dory Jr. won the title, there were angles and promos and interviews that revolved around the family. Yeah. And Senior would go on television and he would say, "You don't deserve a match with my son. And I tell you what, if you can beat my younger son, you might be able to get a match with the champion." And then they'd have a match with and they'd beat Terry, and then Senior would come on television the next week and go, okay, well, you beat my younger son, but I don't think you can beat an old man. You can't beat an old man like me.
A guy like me.
If you can beat an old man like me, you might be able to get a match with my son, and then they'd have the match with Senior, and then they'd beat Senior, then they'd get the world championship match. I mean, that'd never been done before.
No, it never been done. That's part of the reason too. I'll tell you when that accident happened, how it
The
hurt
pickup
Jack
truck,
and I both so much, because we'd gone around the loop, around the NWA loop, myself and Jack, doing jobs for every top guy in the territory to get them ready for when Jack was to become champion. Then it was delayed, so all that delay kind of cost both Jack and myself money because we'd already done jobs and
it took all the heat off of you because when you by the time you went back, it had already been too much time since you
too much time in between there, so it kind of really hurt our momentum at that time, but that's just one of the spoils of the business that during that time frame.
Yeah, and I'd put it in my feature on Dory Jr. that in 1965 there was a handicap match booked in St. Louis with Dick the Bruiser and Senior and Junior, and Dick the Bruiser was going to go over. And just so happened Dory Sr. couldn't make it to St. Louis for the match because there was a pickup truck accident.
Did you know that, John? There was a previous pickup truck accident? Tell John that story.
Yeah, so Dory Sr. supposedly had a pickup truck accident on the farm. He ran into a piece of construction equipment, and his mom and dad were in the vehicle with him, and they had received minor injuries. But Senior couldn't make the St. Louis match because he had a pickup truck accident.
And they were doing a job.
Which, when Munchnick heard it in '73, that Junior can't do the match with Jack Briscoe because he had a pickup truck accident. It wasn't the first time he heard the pickup truck accident excuse.
It's kind of like when Steve went over in Milwaukee. He got his lip busted open by Mark Merrill by mistake and had to go get it sewed up. And Vince goes, "I appreciate you coming back." Steve said, "I was going over."
Exactly.
If not, there may have been a pickup truck wreck.
Yeah.
And I really think the shadow of Senior stayed over Junior, and after he died, I think his shadow stayed over them the rest of their lives. And I think somewhere along the line, he probably told them, as long as you live, don't ever give up the pickup truck accident. Like, it's always
one of them.
And you have those moments where, and I know Jerry's done this before, where you are talking to them, and you both know that the pickup truck was a work, but they're never going to actually admit it. But
he got so mad at me and Jerry. Whoo! Yeah. And I was quoting what he said in his book. We're going to let him say whatever he wants to say. We're not trying to put him feet to the fire or anything. We're not trying to expose nothing. It just, he wrote this in his book, and all I was doing was quoting his book. Right. And I was going to let him say whatever he wanted. We weren't trying to put it, but boy, he got mad at us.
Yeah. And I just think that he told them, like, we never going to tell anybody about this,
The wreck was a wreck.
That's what he said. A wreck was a wreck.
Yeah.
And then we asked him, Tony, you'll love this, and Junior, I love you, that, man. But we asked him this: Junior, when did you know you were becoming a heavyweight champion? When the referee went 1, 2, 3, and I'm thinking, you won by a spinning toe hold. There was no 1, 2, 3.
And Kaniski always said,
I love it. He's kayfabing us.
You know what's funny about that match in '69 where Junior beat Kaniski with the spinning toe hold? Kaniski always said for the rest of his career, like, I thought it was 2 out of 3 falls. He goes, when I gave up and I gave up the match and I submitted, I thought we had 2 more falls to go. I didn't.
These guys are unbelievable.
I know. Well, Terry later on in life, I've seen it. Gosh, I don't know, 5 or 6 times where someone's asking him about the pickup truck accident, and Junior was always a bad driver. He would never give it up.
Terry was a bad driver, not Junior.
Evidently,
they all had three car wrecks in the same day. Going to a town. Not coming back. We're going to a town.
Evidently, that ranch was a dangerous place to drive your pickup.
Yeah, well, it is my kind of mountainous, out there. Reason they call it canyon.
So that's our El Paso Wrestling War and Albuquerque Wrestling War story for this episode. So,
well, there you have it, episode number 10, and we will be back next week.
going into the 60s.
Number 11 for the greatest state, country in the history of the world. God bless Texas.